Tune into ESG Matters with Risk Insights, where we explore ESG with impact.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to ESG Matters with Risk Insights. I'm your host, Dr. Anushka Bogdanov. Over the last few days, I have been touched by many messages I have received from colleagues, friends, members of the media, and institutions across the globe regarding the ongoing legal process involving the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Many of you have reached out with words of encouragement, thoughtful advice, and unwavering support, and for that I am sincerely grateful. As many of you know, these legal processes remain ongoing, and accordingly, I will address them in greater detail at the appropriate time. However, today I would like to speak about something much larger. I would like to speak about trust, about proportionality, materiality, and ultimately the future of the African capital markets and our continent. Because these issues are much larger than one individual. The role of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange is to protect market integrity and preserve confidence in South Africa's capital markets. And that is precisely why questions of proportionality and materiality matter. They concern the type of institutions and indeed the type of society that we as South Africans wish to build. Throughout events of the last few years, responsibility of various stages of the process has rested with individuals occupying positions of authority. These have included the Johannesburg Stock Exchange former Chief Executive Officer Dr. Leila Fourie, who retired last year, current Chief Executive Officer Valdene Reddy, former Chief Operating Officer Itumeleng Monale, and the Head of Issuer Regulations, Andre Visser, amongst others. Institutions do not act in isolation. They act through people. And with positions of responsibility comes duties of accountability, transparency, and stewardship. Many were asking why I approached the Financial Services Tribunal. The answer is simple. I sought an independent examination of the issues raised by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange through the lenses of proportionality and materiality. The principles of proportionality and materiality lie at the heart of risk management. They are fundamental to good governance. They are fundamental to ESG. And ultimately, they are fundamental to justice and our society. Materiality addresses important questions. What matters? What creates harm? What protects stakeholders? What serves the public interest? And what are the unintended consequences of our decisions? In ESG, we often speak about materiality in relation to companies and risks. But materiality should not only apply to companies and risk, but also to the way institutions exercise power. This in turn raises broader questions regarding the differences between principle-based frameworks governing directors of listed companies, such as the King Code, and the legislative frameworks governing senior officials in the public sector through statutes such as the Public Finance Management Act and the Municipal Finance Management Act, to name a few. Corporate governance in South Africa has historically been founded on the principles of ethical leadership, proportionality, and the application of judgment. Public sector governance, by contrast, is primarily underpinned by legislation intended to promote transparency and accountability through clearly defined statutory obligations. This distinction raises important questions. Over the years, South Africa has witnessed the collapse of several major listed companies and allegations of misconduct involving directors, executives, and events that resulted in billions of rands being wiped from savings, pension funds, and retirement assets of ordinary citizens. Yet, based on publicly available records, instances of public naming, public censures, or findings relating to fit and proper requirements have been relatively uncommon. This raises an important question. How do we ensure that principles of accountability, transparency, proportionality, and materiality are applied consistently in a manner that strengthens trust in our institutions and capital markets? By contrast, transparency and public accountability are explicit features in public sector governance frameworks and the legislation that underpins them. This raises a broader question. Should there be greater consistency in how principles of accountability, transparency, materiality, and proportionality are applied across both the private and public sectors? And equally important, how do we ensure that these principles are applied in a manner that strengthens trust in institutions while remaining fair, balanced, and proportionate? Public and private sector ultimately deliver the same goal, public good. Now let's look at public good in my process with the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Throughout this process, certain facts have remained unchanged, although they have not always featured prominently in the broader public discussion. There have never been any allegations nor any findings relating to financial fraud, theft, corruption, insider trading, market manipulation, or any personal financial enrichment arising from the doctorate that became subject of scrutiny. When most people hear the word fraud, they understandably associate it with the unlawful obtaining of money, assets, or financial advantage through deception or with conduct that causes financial harm to others. In my process with the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, there has never been any allegation that shareholders suffered financial losses. There has never been any allegation that pension funds or retirement savings being harmed. There has never been any allegation of personal financial enrichment arising from the doctorate itself. No appointment was obtained because of my title. These are simple facts, and facts matter. It is also worth noting that since the launch of ESG GPS, first on the continent and one of the first global artificial intelligence data-driven platforms in 2020 that was pioneered by myself, which was supported by keynote addresses from prominent leaders across the globe, including the current Chief Executive Officer, Valdene Reddy, the former Chief Financial Officer, Arti Takurdin, and the current JSE Board and Self-Regulatory Organization Committee member, Dr. Faith Kanyele, I have not occupied a seat on any listed company board, nor have I held any paid board position. Furthermore, none of the board or advisory positions that I have held during my career required a doctorate as a condition of appointment. These roles were founded upon experience, expertise, and the trust placed in me by institutions and individuals concerned. Over the last 3 years, I have had the privilege of serving on numerous global and African committees, advisory bodies, and initiatives relating to sustainability, governance, and risk management. At no stage to date have I been removed from them or asked to step down from any of these roles. Indeed, many of these institutions have continued to place their trust and confidence in both me and the work undertaken by our team. Yet the consequences of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange process has not been borne by me alone. Members of my team have experienced professional consequences and setbacks, particularly within South Africa. Perhaps that too raises questions about proportionality, because behind every innovation are people. Behind every institution are people. And behind every decision are consequences that extend far beyond one individual. My current doctorate and research was pursued independently and substantially completed before any sanctions were imposed by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. The purpose of my doctoral research, which was among the first studies globally to examine an entire emerging market stock exchange, was to provide an academic foundation for the ESG GPS model, the first AI data-driven ESG ratings and sustainability data platform built for Africa by Africans. And this was to position Africa as a meaningful contributor to global climate risk management and sustainable finance initiatives while assisting regulators, asset managers, and corporates in ensuring that the continent receives its fair share of sustainable investment flow. In doing so, the model sought to support a more equitable, just transition and strengthen Africa's resilience to climate and related risks through deepening its capital markets. Ultimately, the vision behind my research was simple: to ensure that every person in Africa counts and that Africa itself is recognized not merely as a recipient of global solutions, but is an active contributor to the future of sustainable finance. Therefore, the issue that deserved the most careful consideration was one of proportionality and materiality. Over almost a decade with extraordinary people from across Africa, some of whom remain throughout the journey and others whose contributions form part of the story along the way, we built Africa's first AI ESG ratings and sustainability data platform. Not because it was easy or funding was abundant, or we enjoyed the support of major institutions or asset managers, but because Africa deserves to build its own sustainable finance infrastructure. The future of economics is increasingly green. The future of trade is increasingly shaped by carbon and climate considerations. The future of investments is increasingly influenced by sustainability. And Africa cannot afford to remain permanently dependent upon frameworks, methodologies, and intellectual property developed elsewhere. After centuries of colonialism, Africa must shape its own future through an African narrative, independent, confident, and well connected to the rest of the world. Without drawing conclusions, they are questions. They are questions that deserve objective reflection. Was proportionality adequately considered? Was materiality adequately considered? Are there circumstances in which institutions may simultaneously perform functions that could give rise to perceptions of overlapping interest? Was health circumstances and years of treatments appropriately considered? Were communications with relevant institution during the years following remission considered? Did anyone seek to understand the broader human circumstances? Were commercial and regulatory functions at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange appropriately separated? How many due diligences were conducted on the company, our products, services by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and what were their conclusions? If a transgression existed, were subsequent commercial relationships established before or after regulatory processes commenced, and what were the due diligences that were undertaken? Beyond the licensing fees payable by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, the more important question is this: what was the strategic significance of the ESG GPS model and its potential role in shaping the future architecture of sustainable finance in Africa? How many African-owned ESG rating businesses currently exist and where are they domiciled? Are there individuals involved in governance, oversight, and regulation who simultaneously occupy positions or leadership roles within organizations operating in adjacent sectors such as ESG ratings, sustainability analytics, or credit ratings? And if so, have actual potential or perceived conflicts been appropriately disclosed and managed? And should these standards not apply equally to those entrusted with positions of authority and stewardship? Should institutions and regulators be held to the same standards of transparency and governance that they expect from directors and issuers? Does good governance require independence, not only in fact but also in appearance? These are not accusations, they are questions, and questions are the foundation of accountability. Strong institutions are not weakened by questions, they are strengthened by them. History teaches us that nations do not become prosperous simply because they possess resources. They prosper because they protect institutions, and equally they prosper because they protect innovators. Innovation takes years, trust takes decades, and credibility, once destroyed, may take generations to rebuild. The unintended consequences of destroying credibility do not end with one individual. They affect entrepreneurs in Africa, they affect investors, our pension funds, our retirement savings, and ultimately, they affect Africa's ability to compete in a world where intellectual property are becoming strategic assets. There is one issue I wish to address, not from a legal perspective, but from a human one. Behind every case, every judgment, every headline are families who never asked to become part of public discourse. Families should never become collateral damage. I remain profoundly grateful for the love and support of my husband, my mother, my brothers, my nieces and nephews, and especially my daughter, who has been surrounded by love and support. I am equally grateful to my daughter's stepmom and her father, who are wonderful parents and an important addition to her life. As a child growing up under apartheid, I experienced firsthand what it means to live in a society where empathy was conditioned by color, when I could not be admitted into a whites-only hospital. I survived a car explosion that left more than 60% of my body severely burned and scarred. 47 years later, I cannot help but reflect upon the importance of empathy in leadership and in institutions. One of the greatest lessons in history is that conflict, division, and mistrust often arise when leaders stop listening, when institutions lose sight of humanity, and when people cease to recognize the dignity and experience of others. Strong institutions are not weakened by questions, they are strengthened by them. Thank you for listening. I've placed a link to my public statement in the description should you wish to read it. Until next time, ciao for now.